Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Meet the Icons, where it's my immense pleasure to talk about my favorite icons in the world of business, technology, entertainment, education, and general people who have succeeded in one sphere of life or the other. In this segment of the channel, we'll be talking about how they started, their achievements, their struggles, and how they navigated the path of success, and ultimately lessons we can learn from their lives. So without further ado, let's meet today's icon. Today's icon is Stephen Paul Jobs. Stephen Paul Jobs was an American entrepreneur, business magnate, industrial designer, media proprietor, and investor. He was the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Apple, the chairman and majority shareholder of Pixar, a member of the Walt Disney Company's board of directors following its acquisition of Pixar, and he was the founder, chairman, and CEO of Next. He is widely recognized as a pioneer of the personal computer revolution of the 1970s and 1980s, along with his early business partner and fellow Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, to a Syrian father named Abdul Fattah Jandali and a German-American mother named Joan Carol Schiebel. His cousin stated that his birth name was Abdul Latif Jandali. He was adopted to Paul and Clara Jobs, who took responsibility of bringing up Steve and making sure he had access to qualitative education. His adoptive father also played an important role in supporting Steve and introducing him to mechanics. Steve later chose his own path by being interested in electronics at an early age. He made friends with people he shared interests with, although he had very few friends. Steve attended several high schools, although he was uninterested in school at first, but later developed interest in 4th grade when his teacher, Imogen Teddy Hill, reportedly bribed him to finish a workbook. Jobs stated that he learned a lot that year than in any other year when he was in school. Steve finally attended Homestead High School, where he met most of his friends, such as Bill Fernandez, Steve Wozniak, and his first girlfriend, Krishnan Brennan, who was an artistic Homestead junior before moving to college. Steve attended Reed College and dropped out just after one semester and took classes in calligraphy as a drop-in student. During this time, Steve stated that he would sleep on the floors of friends' dorm rooms, returned Coke bottles for food money, and traveled to the Hare Krishna temple for a good meal every week. Steve Jobs and his friends worked together on electronics projects, and one of the notable ones was the illegal, low-cost digital blue box to generate the necessary tones to manipulate the telephone networks, allowing free long-distance calls. The clandestine sales of the blue boxes made Steve Jobs believe that not only was electronics fun, it was profitable. Steve Jobs invited Steve Wozniak to help him build the circuit for the arcade video game Breakout, a project Steve Jobs had at work that was worth $5,000, but he had told Steve Wozniak that it was worth $700 and they will split it evenly. By March 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak developed what would turn out to be a revolution in the tech industry by the Apple I, which was only a circuit board packed in a box. On April 1st, 1976, the duo collaborated with an administrative overseer, Ronald Wayne, and established Apple Computer Company, as it was initially called. Apple I was sold to computer hobbyists for $50, which is equivalent to $267.25 as of 2023. The Apple I was sold to Paul Terrell, who owned a computer retail store that sold 50 fully assembled Apple I units for $500 each, and eventually about 200 Apple I computers were produced in total. Soon, the Apple II was launched after Steve Jobs sold his Volkswagen van and Steve Wozniak sold his HP Scientific calculator to fund the Apple II. The company grew and more products were launched, such as the Lisa computer, on which Steve Jobs led the team to design, and later the Macintosh, being inspired by the Lisa computer, on which Steve Jobs took over its development in 1981 from early Apple employee Jeff Raskin. In 1983, Steve Jobs appointed John Sculley as Apple's CEO after luring him from Pepsi Cola. But it turned out that Steve Jobs and John Sculley's vision for the company greatly differed, which brought about disagreements and misunderstandings between Steve Jobs and John Sculley. It was around this time that Steve Wozniak left the company, including many other staff members. By early 1985, the Macintosh's failure to defeat the major competitor in the market, IBM PC, was obvious and strengthened John Sculley's position in the company. In May of the same year, John Sculley decided to reorganize Apple and proposed a plan to the board that would remove Steve Jobs from the Macintosh group and put him in charge of new product development, which would render Steve Jobs powerless within Apple. This made Steve Jobs to develop a plan to get rid of John Sculley and take over as Apple's CEO. Steve Jobs' plan was leaked and he asked to leave Apple. His resignation was initially declined, but a few months down the line, on September 17, 1985, Steve Jobs, together with 5 additional senior Apple employees, submitted a letter of resignation and joined Steve Jobs on his new venture, Next. Steve Jobs founded Next Inc. with $7 million, and after struggling financially for some years, he attracted the attention of a billionaire, Ross Perot, who invested heavily in the company. And soon after, Next Computer was shown to the world. In 1990, Next workstations were launched and priced at $9,999. The company reported its first yearly profit of $1.03 million in 1994. In 1996, Next Software Inc. developed Web Objects, a framework for web application development, which was used to build and run the Apple Store, Mobile Me service, and the iTunes Store, after Next was acquired by Apple in 1997. In 1986, Steve Jobs funded the spin-out of the graphics group, later renamed Pixar, from the Lucasfilm's computer graphics division for the price of $10 million, $5 million of which was given to the company as capital, and the other $5 million was paid to Lucasfilms for technology rights. In 1955, Steve Jobs was credited as executive producer of Toy Story, the first film produced by Pixar in partnership with Disney. The movie brought financial success and critical acclaim to the studio when it was released. Pixar went on to produce other films, of which many received recognition from the Academy Award for Best Animated Features. Pixar produced its first film after Steve Jobs' death in 2012, titled Brave, which was produced to his honor with a tribute of his contribution to the studio. Brave also received recognition by the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. In January 2004, Steve Jobs announced that he would never deal with Disney again after a failed negotiation process with the chief executive, Michael Eisner. However, the relationship was mended after Bob Iger replaced Michael Eisner in October 2005. Disney went on to purchase Pixar in an all-stock transaction worth $7.4 billion, making Steve Jobs the Walt Disney Company's largest single shareholder, with approximately 7% of the company's stock. In 1996, Apple announced that it will buy Next for $400 million, a deal that was later finalized in February 1997 and which saw Steve Jobs back to the Apple Computer Company, which he had founded. After going through a number of titles, he was finally named Interim Chief Executive Officer. In March 1998, Steve Jobs terminated several projects such as Newton, Cyberdog, and OpenDoc to concentrate Apple's efforts on returning to profitability. As Apple's ICO, a title Steve Jobs stuck to, the company subsequently branched out, introducing and improving upon other digital appliances, such as the introduction of the iPod, a portable music player, iTunes, a digital music software, and the iTunes Store. These products made great impact in the consumer electronics industry and even in the music distribution industry. On 29th of June 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone, making its entry into the cellular phone business, which has now turned into a huge revolution in the cellular phone business. In October 2003, Steve Jobs was diagnosed with cancer. He later announced to his employees that he had a cancerous tumor in his pancreas. Steve Jobs resisted his doctor's recommendation for medical intervention for 9 months in favor of alternative medicine, and while he was being treated, he was absent from Apple. Before his absence, Steve Jobs had handed over to Tim Cook, who was the head of worldwide sales and operations at Apple. In August 2006, Steve Jobs delivered the keynote for Apple's annual Worldwide Developers Conference. His appearance, delivery, and choice to delegate significant portions of his keynote to other presenters inspired a flurry of media and internet speculations about the state of his health. On January 14, 2009, Steve Jobs wrote an internal Apple memo that in the previous week he had learned that his health-related issues are more complex than he originally thought. He announced a 6-month leave of absence until the end of June 2009 to allow him focus on his health. Tim Cook then became acting CEO of Apple, with Steve Jobs still involved in major strategic decisions. In April 2009, Steve Jobs underwent a liver transplant at the Methodist University Hospital Transplant Institute in Memphis, Tennessee. On August 24, 2011, Steve Jobs announced his resignation as Apple's CEO, writing to the board in a memo stating, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, the day has come." End of quote. Steve Jobs became the chairman of the board and named Tim Cook as his successor as CEO. Steve Jobs continued to work for Apple until before his death 6 weeks later. Steve Jobs died at his Palo Alto, California home at 3 p.m. on August 5, 2011 due to a respiratory arrest. He had lost consciousness the day before and died with his wife, children, and sisters at his side. At his request, Steve Jobs was buried at an unmarked grave at Alta Mesa Memorial Park on October 7th, 2011. Steve Jobs, during his lifetime, let his light shine, and I hope that gives you the permission to let your light shine. I wish you all the best in all your endeavors. Please subscribe and give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.